Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lab where we're going to get hands-on with Google Cloud Storage. We'll use the Google Cloud Console to see how it actually works. Alright, let's jump right in. So to start off, log into the Google Cloud Console with your user account. From now on, just assume that this will be the account we use in each of the labs. We only want to use the admin account when we really need it. So I'll see you in the console. Alright, here we are in the console, and we're logged in as the user account. To start off with, we're going to create a new project. Generally, when you're working on a new thing, you make a new project for it. And in this case, we're going to make a project that we'll use to explore a few new services. So we'll call it Services Exploration Labs. Like always, it takes a bit of time to finish creating the project, but when it does finish, we can select it from the list. Of course, we start out with no resources, but we're going to do something about that now. We could search for Google Cloud Storage, but let's find it in the list instead. Here it is, and we can even pin it to the top. We start out in the browser, but since we have no buckets, it shows us this prompt instead. Now, Google Cloud Storage will let us store all sorts of objects, but they need to be stored inside of a bucket, a container. So let's make one of those now by saying Create Bucket. Now, the first thing it asks us for here is the name for this bucket. And in particular, this must be unique across cloud storage. And this means all cloud storage clients. Just like project IDs, bucket names are globally unique. So when you type something and then wait a little bit, it'll tell you whether that particular name is unique. In this case, someone has already taken storage-lab, but that's no worry, I'll just add something more. The next choice it asks us to make is the storage class, but this is very much tied to the next one, which is location. The reason I say this is because if you've chosen multi-regional, then in the location dropdown, you have the multi-regions. But if you instead choose regional, in the dropdown, you see each particular region instead. Now, if you choose nearline or cold line, the dropdown includes the multi-regions and the regions. But since the location of a bucket cannot be changed after the bucket has been created, this is effectively choosing whether you want the bucket to be multi-regional or regional. For now, let's make this a multi-regional bucket in the United States. In the advanced settings, we can add labels to the bucket and change whether we want Google to be managing the encryption keys or whether we want to manage them ourselves. But since we haven't set up any encryption keys in KMS, we should just leave this as a Google managed key. That said, we could add a label to this bucket while we're here. Now, one last thing to point out before we move on is that although the retrieval cost is listed as free for multi-regional storage, we can't forget the fact that we'll be charged for network transfer for retrievals that leave the Google Cloud. Well, when we're done here, we can click Create. Now that we have a bucket, going back to this list will show it to us, and we can get back to the bucket details by just clicking on it. Well, what good is a bucket unless we upload some files, right? So let's do that now. Let's upload the Cloud Shell README, and feel free to include a couple of other things as well. You can see here that the upload to the console is actually pretty smart. It uploads things in parallel, and it's actually pretty reasonable to use this to upload a smallish number of files or folders. When it's finished, we can close the upload dialog, and then clicking on the file opens it in a new tab. So here's the Cloud Shell README. And here's a picture I took of Ryan taking a picture of Robin in front of the Golden Gate Bridge when we were all together for a conference in San Francisco. Now, if you look at the URL for this particular file, it's very long, but the reason it's so long is because it's a signed request to be able to view this file. Not just anyone is allowed to view this file. By default, every file is private. You have to go out of your way to make it public. Now, in all likelihood, you're not seeing the same list of checkboxes as I have on my screen here. And that's because shortly after I recorded this, Google changed the UI to make it much harder to share things publicly. Now, I'm sure they did this on purpose because it's bad press for Google if people have security breaches while using their platform. But for the rest of this lab then, when I say check on this checkbox, you should instead go to the far right-hand side of the screen, press on the little menu button, select Edit Permissions, and make the changes in there. To share it publicly, you add an item, enter all users as the name, make sure the access column says Reader, and save your changes. That will give you the link you need. Now technically, the entity dropdown should also be set to User, but it's okay if you don't do that yourself each time because Google will make that change for you when you close the dialog. To unshare the object, delete the All Users line, and save. Okay, so back to the rest of the lab. So if we want, we can check this Share Publicly checkbox, and then it gives us a much nicer URL. In fact, this URL is entirely predictable. It is always going to be https://storage.googleapis.com /the bucket name /the object name. Now I say object name, not file name, because each Google Cloud Storage bucket just has a whole bunch of objects in it. It does not have a hierarchical file system. Now you can create hierarchy here if you want to by giving each object a name that includes slashes, and if you do that, it'll act like folders. In fact, when you create a folder like this, and then refresh the bucket, you should see it show up in the list. I'm not sure why the test folder isn't showing up quite yet, but we'll give it a little bit of time. Alright, so given that we understand how to make these URLs, let's make a URL for a private file instead. Let's copy the URL for this link, and then replace the name of the object with the name of another one. So of course, if we try to go to this without authentication in the URL, it denies us access. We need to share the file before it'll let us view that. Now that said, I might still call them files often enough, just because that's how I think about them. But when it really comes down to it, they are objects, not files. Of course, this view also lets us delete files quite simply. And there we go, now the test folder has shown up. Now it's a little odd that this test folder didn't show up earlier, but it did show up now, and we can see that it includes a trailing slash. Every object whose name ends with a slash is considered to be a folder, and you can navigate into that folder and upload files there if you want. Now another thing you can do is to rename files by going to the little menu at the end and choosing Rename. That name seems unnecessarily long, so we'll just shorten it. But before I press the Rename button, I want to point out that this dialog gives you the GSUtil equivalent for renaming this object. In fact, there are a lot of places in Google Cloud where the console UI will show you what the command line equivalent would be for what it's doing. When it does show you something like this, you could hit the copy button and then cancel and run this command in Cloud Shell instead to get the same result. But for now, I'm just going to rename it in the console. Well, alright, let's take a look at what happens when you try to edit the bucket. Now, like I said before, the name cannot be changed, and neither can the location. But you can change the default storage class for new objects that are put in this bucket. Of course, multi-regional cannot become regional, and neither could regional become multi-regional. But you could set them to use nearline or coldline if you wanted. So a nice thing about this is that you can see how easy it is to put objects in a bucket and share them. But sharing them doesn't just mean sending a link. You could refer to these files in other systems that you're building. Okay, there's one more thing I should show you. If you go back to this list of buckets and drop the drop-down on the far right, you can get at editing the labels in addition to the storage class. But the thing I want to show you now is editing the bucket permissions. Here, you can add permissions to the entire bucket, not just individual files. And you could do things like add the all users member and give it permission to view all objects. Doing this makes this a public bucket, which is a very dangerous thing to do, and you should definitely only do it if you're absolutely sure. For my case, I'm going to undo that right now. Well, alright, that's it for this lab. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. If not, please feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.